right, so today we're going to be talking about something pretty interesting, something that gets talked about a lot, and it's always brought up in discussions and whatnot, and that's why did One Punch Man Season 2 turn out the way that it did, and why didn't the people that were involved with Season 1 come back for it? Well, recently, we got some more insight into this from some comments made by the Season 1 director, Shingo Natsume, and I'm going to go into that, but first, let me just say that we still don't know the entire story, or at least the public doesn't. And as far as I know, we don't. So, and it's possible that we never will, but I'm assuming that it ultimately came down to money. Now, I could be wrong, of course, but at least this interview clears up one of the main points of conjecture, I'll say, because it seems like a lot of people think that it didn't turn out the way that it did because the director was not available, and it turns out that that was definitely not the case. Now, before we go into what he has said, let me just brief you on who Shingo Natsume is. So, as stated, he is the director of One Punch Man Season 1. And the way that that's billed makes me think that, like, overall for the season, he directed it. Because if you'll look, like, individually, each episode was directed by like a different person other than him, but he mainly had like full control, I suppose, or at least direction control over episodes 1 and episodes 12 individually. But other than that, like, I guess he just oversaw the entire season, giving input to each individual episode maybe. But he's also directed other shows like Space Dandy and Boogie Pop, but we mainly want to look at episode 12 of season 1, because yes, he was the mastermind behind this incredible episode. And let me just remind you that this is like the Boros versus Saitama and the aftermath of all of that stuff episode, which I think consensus is one of the greatest episodes of anime in history. I mean, this episode really sealed the deal for One Punch Man. I mean, overall, Season 1 really built the franchise, but man, was it capped off with such an incredible ending. Something that is still, you know, to this day, a landmark achievement in battle anime, in my opinion. And yeah, Shingo Natsume was behind this, so that's why there's such respect on this guy's name, I think mostly. So let's get into what he has actually said in this interview. So he was asked what his opinion on One Punch Man Season 1 was, and also his opinion on Season 2. And what he basically says was that he wanted to come back to direct Season 2. So this just like totally debunks any other, I don't know, info that was out there, this conjecture for some reason that was, I don't know, a popular opinion, I guess, where he was not available. And that's just not the case. Because, I don't know, some people think that he might be tied to Madhouse or something, but he also says that he's freelance. So I guess he's not tied to any studio. He kind of just comes and goes as he pleases. And being freelance is what he says is the main reason why he wasn't able to direct Season 2. He can only do so much being in that position. And he said that it ultimately comes down to studios and employees and all of that stuff. So I guess that also goes back to what I was talking about earlier with JC staff just wanting to have complete control over Season 2, and I suppose like costing less than Madhouse or Bones, or paying more, or however that stuff works. It just ultimately came down to money, and JC staff won the bidding war, I suppose, one way or another. And then they just wanted to have their own house directors and people take control of Season 2, and they didn't just want like a freelance like Shingo Natsume to come back. Which is really unfortunate, because it's kind of like they just skipped out on the integrity of things, or at least in my opinion. I don't want to put too much hate on these guys, because Season 2 wasn't completely egregious. I mean, of course, it wasn't as good as Season 1, but you'd think that considering that Season 1 essentially built the reputation and the overall franchise of One Punch Man as it is today, you think that they'd want to like recreate that as much as they can and keep the legacy going with Season 2, but they just decided to essentially downgrade, going to JC staff, unfortunately. So aside from that, he also said another kind of controversial thing, or at least in my opinion it was, and I'm surprised that he said it. So he said that he wishes JC staff did a much better job with Season 2. And like, I'm just surprised by this, because it's like, I didn't think that Japanese people or just animators wouldn't be as confrontational as this. I thought they would kind of just stay humble and kind of just say, yeah, they did as good as they could or whatever. But he was just like very nonchalant about this. Like, definitely throwing shade at JC's staff. Like, his expression, to me at least, expresses that. So that's interesting, and I guess that means that maybe season 2 is like universally panned by even the animators and the other directors and whatnot. And I suppose that maybe Shingo Natsume is closer to this because season 1 was kind of like his baby, you know, almost like his magnum opus, if you will, because I don't think he's ever really meant anything that like surpasses that, at least not that I know of. So when he sees somebody else handling his child and they just don't do it the justice that he deserves, then he's just like, you know, I just kind of wish they did better because, you know, it wasn't as good as season 1 and it should have been. So I guess this is a good time to go into some of the issues that season 2 had, at least directorial-wise, not so much animation. I can't really speak on that. And then also just the reception that it had, universally. So the main thing that I see in season 2 issue-wise is that some of these episodes have multiple directors on them. As where with season 1, we just had a single director on each individual episode. But for example, like episode 4, which is the Metal Bat episode, had 3 different directors on this thing. And that's obviously way too many cooks in the kitchen. And then episode 5 had 2 directors on it. And I don't think it's a coincidence that these are the 2 lowest rated episodes of the season, at least by IMDb's ratings. Now, also, like, the last 2 episodes, 11 and 12, they both had multiple directors, and episode 11 turned out pretty good. And see, you know, episode 12, it seemed to desire more, but it wasn't too bad. So maybe it's not entirely that, why it's responsible for its discrepancy in quality, but I think it's definitely one of the reasons for sure. But let's go back to the IMDb ratings because I want us to take a look at these just so you guys can see what the consensus reception to season 2 was, because sometimes we kind of forget that we're like almost in an echo chamber, I suppose, in the hardcore community of just One Punch Man and anime fans in general, where we'll just, you know, pan this series so much because, you know, how it turned out, and also comparing it to season 1. But we really have to look at the casuals and the consensus because they really make up the majority while we're more so in the minority here. So surprisingly, season 2, like I said, according to IMDb, really didn't have as bad of a reception as you think it would. Now, of course, it had not as strong as season 1, but the difference isn't as staggering as you'd think. So mainly season 1 had, you know, universal praise. No episode drops below an 8.6 rating, which is the lowest, which is the first episode of season 1. And as for season 2, the lowest rating that got was 7.4 on episode 5, which was like the Metal Bat versus Garo conclusion and some of the other martial arts tournament beginning stuff. So yeah, that's also, like I said, one of the episodes that had multiple directors on it and everything. But if we're also comparing like the rest of these scores to season 1, they're kind of similar. I think season 2, at least to the majority, was received pretty good. I mean, it could be way worse. Like, considering that nothing drops below 7.4, I think is pretty good. And also, like, if you've noticed like the receptions of like the real casuals, like watching just the English version exclusively on Toonami, at least according to Twitter, they seem to love it. So it's like, it's still good, it's just not great, if that makes sense. Then also going back to Shingo Natsume, does this mean that he might come back for season 3? Well, of course, I certainly hope so, and I'm sure you do too. And maybe him voicing his opinion like this might reach the right ears. And maybe they'll be like, you know what, we're right, season 2 is definitely lackluster. Let's try to recreate the magic from season 1. At least bring back Shingo Natsume. It's really up in the air if it's going to go to Bones or Madhouse or whatever, but we can only really hope. And if you're just wondering, like, what's the status of season 3? Is season 3 even going to be a thing? Please check out my video, One Punch Man Season 3 discussion that I recently made. I talk about that stuff in detail and go into all of the variables that go into season 3, and even if it's going to get made in the first place and when it might air. But that's pretty much it for the video today, guys. Let me know what you think about all of this. Do you think season 2 was just completely egregious and unredeemable, or do you think that it was fine but just not great and it could have been a lot better? And also, what do you think about Shingo Natsume? Let me know in the comments, and if you liked the video, guys, please give it a like. I also have a Patreon that gives you access to a weekly Q&A. And if you haven't already, please subscribe as well. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.